Well, I am very fortunate now to welcome rather Michael Schade, the CEO and co-founder of ROCKFISH Games, who is putting out Everspace 2 onto consoles, available now on PC. Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you agreed to do the interview. I have a vested interest in Everspace. The game looks amazing. I'm stoked for the console release. I have so many questions for you, but I'm curious to know, how are you guys feeling with the console release trailer now out there for everyone to see?
The team is super excited, of course. I mean, we've been working on this for a little bit over 5 years.
Mhm.
And since we don't have any publishers or investors having our back, so if a release went well, it's a great relief. No, really, the team is super excited. We're sitting at 88% positive reviews on Steam. So that's
Mhm.
fascinating. So we have high hopes that there will be good feedback on the console version as well. Because if you go through early access, you do your polishing, and then you do the console port, the game's in great shape. And I just play tested it myself. Super smooth, 60 frames. It looks gorgeous on Xbox and PlayStation. So yeah, we're in a good position.
Super exciting. Super exciting. You guys announced the release date would be August 15th for Xbox Series S and X, as well as PlayStation 5. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Oh, so cool. So exciting. So close and right around the corner. That is a blast. Um, I want to touch on the idea that we're talking about Everspace 2 and that you guys have Everspace 1. It's out there. People have been playing it for years. But this is a different take. Everspace 1 was a roguelike in some ways. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, you could even say that we did a non-sequel. So a lot of people were asking us. So Everspace One was quite successful. I mean, we sold over 1 million of copies. Why did you ditch the core loop? And the answer is, having a linear roguelike in the first place was kind of a compromise for the game that we wanted to make from the get-go, but we didn't
Mm-hmm.
have the budget to make an open world action RPG in space, because
Mm-hmm.
that's like, it costs you more than 10 million to make, and we just started the new studio with our first Kickstarter. We didn't have the budget for that, so we had to be a bit more flexible about the core loop, and this is why we came up with this linear roguelike mechanic. We
Mm-hmm.
still wanted to have this very space combat focused title. There are RPG elements. There is a story, which is a bit tricky in a roguelike, but I think we found a good way to tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to the commercial success of the first Everspace, then on Everspace 2, we could work on a much bigger vision. And even the people, our fans who liked Everspace 1 said, yeah, but I rather want to have an open world space action RPG. And so this is why we changed the core loop. And then the internal pitch line from the team was Diablo meets Freelancer.
Oh, okay. So that's a heavy bit of no pressure there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it's like when they came up with this, I was like, "Ooh, that's well, it's the classic." I think every space game fan knows Freelancer, and everybody was hoping for. We want to have another Freelancer. That's like 20 years ago, and we've been waiting too long for this. And because Freelancer had this really made space combat games or this genre more accessible, because you
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to have like a joystick like HOTAS, and
Mm-hmm.
you could play it with mouse and keyboard, and actually it's pretty arcadey the way the flight model. And that was one thing, and then having this open world, and like there's a lot of things going on, and there's just a great story to follow, but you can go also on your own path. So people really wanted to have a successor to that. Now, of
Mm-hmm.
course, we didn't want to just copy that and have it like better paint, better
Mm-hmm.
graphics.
Right.
And our core team, they really love Diablo, like the loot spiral, that you always go for the next epic loot drop, and then you go for uncommon, and then legendary, and have
Mm-hmm.
you make your builds. And this is why they said, hey, let's combine that. And then these are two things that we haven't seen together. So if you want to call it, that's the way where we innovate, by
Mm-hmm.
combining these super popular genres, and
Mm-hmm.
then come up with something new. This is why we said Everspace 2 is a new breed of space game.
That's interesting. And I'm curious. I just the idea of combining a loop and getting loot and the upgrade system with a space combat game is extremely enticing. When I think of Everspace, just in terms of like its flight and combat, I go back to games like Rogue Squadron and Starlancer and Colony Wars. And so when I pull up Freelancer, it's like, yeah, same concept there. That's a blast. Now, in building like those loot systems to have that loop similar to Diablo, uh, how difficult is that to do in general? I mean, I've seen some games try it and not quite get it. Others like Diablo proper, like that's the jam. How difficult is it to get the right scaling and the amount of loot, stuff like that?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. We just did our post-mortem with a team, and
Hmm.
it really came out. The toughest thing was balancing the game because we have 9 different ship classes in the game. So there are
Hmm.
many different types of weapons. Then you have your different stages, you have your legendaries, and then you don't know what kind of crazy builds our fans come up with. And there are some crazy builds. So every Friday we stream the development build for 2 hours, and then we
Hmm.
ask the community to send their save games, and then we try out some of their builds. We're like, oh, we didn't know that you can combine this weapon with another one, and then really you just mow through enemies like crazy, and it's so interesting to see that. And even though it's just a single player game where you could say, well, balancing is not that important, true to a certain degree, but of course we wanted to make sure that really like hunting a certain piece of equipment is really worth your time, and then you feel super powerful once you found it, and then you feel even more clever if you combine it in the right way with the right ship class and whatnot. So a lot of thought went into this. And I have to say, without early access, I think we spent a little bit over 2 years. It would have been
Hmm.
very hard for us to really nail this because we sold 250,000 copies through Steam Early Access. And then
Hmm.
I don't know how many people played it, but quite a lot. And I think a couple thousand pilots provided feedback. And that was super valuable feedback that even if we had done a professional QA, like you hire, let's say 10, 20 pilots to try this out, you would never get this kind of in-depth feedback as we do from our early access pilots. And in fact, we did a lot of changes to the game. For instance, the biggest change was like we had level scaling in there or enemy
Hmm.
scaling. And a lot of people just outright hate it. They don't like
Hmm.
it at all. On the other hand, if you do have a loot based game, and if you don't have a certain type of enemy scaling, if you go to the beginner area, all the loot is worthless. So you
Hmm.
need to find a way to combine that. And that one of the major changes we did during early access was really like come up with a system like enemies are they stay at their level as long as you stay within the star system. There are several sectors within the star system. So it takes about 5-10 hours to play through a star system. If you move to the next, if you hit a certain point in story progression, then there's a radio message. Oh, the enemies of the previous system, they leveled up, they have new gear. So we implemented or incorporated to the lore. And then you know if you go back, the enemies are stronger, but not stronger than you. But still there's a reason to go back. So those are
Gotcha.
the probably the two things that I'd say had been the most challenging here.
So that's really fascinating to hear how involved the community was in helping you guys balance because of early access. Um, what types of feedback would be most helpful? Like if someone's playing the game, I know some people might say, "Oh, this is too easy, too hard." I'm sure that's helpful, but what's the best kind of feedback you can get in terms of helping production?
Yeah, you get that a lot. So you get it on both spectrums, right? We try to balance for normal. So we always said we're gonna have different difficulty levels, but of
Hmm.
course, during early access, you don't do this at the beginning. You do this at a later stage. And then you get people, oh, it's way too easy, like from the super skilled pilots. And I want to have a bigger challenge. And those are the ones who would play on hard, very hard, or we even have a nightmare stage. And
Hmm.
then you had others, maybe they're just not used to the genre, haven't played in a long time, or just not as
Hmm.
skillful. And they say, this is way too hard. There are difficulty spikes, and I can't defeat those enemies, or they miss the point. It's actually an open world game, and you should do some side activities before you go to the next zone, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, so this is so you have that kind of feedback that is
Hmm.
expected, and you said, yeah, that it makes sense. The more valuable feedback comes if people really say, okay, this mechanic doesn't work or I don't understand it. So even watching people play the game, like streamers, it's very, very helpful. So part of the early access was also that we didn't give keys to anybody. You really
Mhm.
had to buy your copy. And by that, you make sure that everybody who plays the game is really invested, be it like
Mm.
the gamer at home or even professional streamers. And
Mhm.
then we could watch them play. And we have that with Kokanich, is one of our biggest fans. He's one of the top streamers, and he backed both of our Kickstarter campaigns, and he
Mhm.
paid €1,000 to have his own space station in Everspace too. And you have that at some point. And there's even a voice line for him in the main story. So really enjoyed that. So when Everspace 2 came out, he played it for 52 hours until he
Mhm.
beat the game. And there was one particular boss fight. I always had the feeling this one is too tough, it's too hard. And
Mhm.
the team loves to ignore my advice or opinion. And
Mhm.
then Co played on hard, very hard, and he also
Mhm.
was frustrated. There would have been a way to make his life easier, but he
Mhm.
didn't play it the way. The way he played it was super frustrating. He said, hey guys, even Co Carnage, who loves the game,
Mhm.
was frustrated by this. Let's change that boss fight, and we did that in the last update. So, and he saw
Mhm.
that, and he really appreciated it. So this is one prime example, especially with the boss fights,
Mhm.
because there you introduce new mechanics or you combine the new mechanics, and then you have to see if people really understand what to do, because us as the developer, we know how to defeat the boss, but if you don't
Mhm.
know that, this is experience, you cannot have that. So this is very useful to work with the team here, that is of the test pilots, so to speak.
Mhm.
And we even went so far that the ones that had been most responsive, I'd say there were like 10 people clocked more than 1,000 hours in the game.
Wow.
We then gave them under NDA access to the final build before the 1.0 release to have a final test round, because obviously you don't have the 1.0 in early access. You still want to have
Right.
the final missions, the end game and whatnot had to be tested, and by those individuals. Amazing feedback. And again, this is nothing you would get from a QA, and they find bugs and things that were like, oh, this is possible or not, or that broken. It's
Mhm.
insane. So it goes so far, I'd say I would never do a game without doing early access.
Interesting. Wow, that's a bold statement then. That's a bold statement then. Does that change the way the way you fund a game for development then? If you're saying, all right, from here on out we only do early access, does that change how you fund it or development times or who you work with? Steam early access, Xbox is early access, I believe. Like, does that change development in a way?
It does a lot. Truth be told, without early access, we could have not made such a big game. So, as I said, we sold 250,000 copies through early access.
Mhm.
Back then, in through early access, the game was $40. Now it's $50. Then, obviously, not worldwide. Worldwide, it's not always the same price. But we really made a couple million just from early access. And
Mhm.
if we had not had done early access, we would have had to go to a publisher, say, hey, give us another 5 million. So the base game has a development budget of 15 million euros.
Mhm.
So, and I'd say, yeah, round about 5 million comes from early access. Then another portion comes from profits from the first game. And then
Mhm.
we have a really good deal with Game Pass. Obviously, I cannot share any details, but you can
Mhm.
imagine those deals are really good.
Mhm.
So if you put this all together, this is how we were able to make such a big game. So without early access, no chance. So we would have had to go through a publisher, and then again, if you try to sell a space game to a publisher, and I've tried this for many years,
Mhm.
they just don't like space games because it is a niche genre. It's
Mhm.
risky. Then there's Star Citizen, there's No Man's Sky, there's Elite Dangerous, and then
Mhm.
they say, "Oh man, that's quite an uphill battle to do
Mhm.
that." So yeah, so we had to do this on our own. And today, in hindsight, obviously we're super excited. And quite a few publishers said, "Ah, damn, we should have signed that title." And I can say, "Yeah, you should have, but you didn't."
And you didn't.
Yeah.
You mentioned Game Pass,
Mhm.
and I know you can't give details there, but is it? You said you couldn't have made this game without early access and the funding from that. Could you have made the game without the Game Pass influx?
We could have, but it would have been a smaller game. So clearly, once we signed the deal with our friends at Microsoft,
Mhm.
because some part of the funds, the license fee is when you launch on PC, the game preview program.
Mhm.
That's something we did. And then you get a significant chunk of the license. And
Mhm.
that enabled us to work 9 more months on the game. Obviously, it's not like the how to say the part of the license doesn't cover the 9 months run rate of our studio, but
Mm-hmm.
combined to the other revenue sources that we had, the ongoing
Mm-hmm.
revenue plus the Game Pass deal enabled us to add 9 to 12 months more production time. And obviously, we were able to add more content, have a better grade of polish. So yeah, it's a really good deal. And then a lot of people ask me, so you probably sold less copies on Steam because we're on Game Pass on PC.
Mm-hmm.
And to be frank, I couldn't see any dip. So at least if you do PC Game Pass, it did not hurt sales. And I'd say right now, it's one of the best, if not the best deal in the industry, especially for indies like us, because it
Mm-hmm.
enables us to work on more smaller genres, like or more niche genres. They're more special. And then it gets us visibility, it gets us extra funding. And yeah, it's a perfect combination. We're still independent. So it's not like if we say we want to get out or release the game at one date, and then we say, well, but we need 3 months longer, and if you can fund that, and Microsoft, yeah, fine, just let us know, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
if you imagine you do this with a publisher and you lock in a
Mm-hmm.
release date, you have to get out. This is why titles get pushed out, even though they're
Mm-hmm.
not ready. But in our case, we're truly independent. We can decide when the game comes out, when it's good enough. We just have to make sure that we let our friends at Microsoft know, and they're very supportive. And then, yeah, you hit the button, and same with the console release. We give them a heads up. You do the planning when it's going to come out, and of course, you try to have a release date close to their big beats. This is what we did with the IGN and ID at Xbox event.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's maximum flexibility, extra funding, and you just make a better game, and everybody's happy. Then even everybody who's not on Game Pass is getting a better game. So even the PlayStation fans get a
Mm-hmm.
better game on PS5 because of the deal with Game Pass.
That's super cool. And should note, by the way, if you pre-order PlayStation users, this includes you guys. You guys are doing a 20% discount if you pre-order the game. Is that correct?
That is correct, but you have to be. This is only for PlayStation Plus, so you have to be
Gotcha.
part of that. But of course, PlayStation Plus makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a rule that they have. I think we wanted to make this for all, but then they say no, it's only available for PS Plus. And technically, there's no real pre-order on Xbox. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're on Game Pass, you also get 20% discount. So technically speaking, on both platforms, you get a 20% off.
Gotcha. So ways to incentivize. It's neat to hear you talk about, I guess, the economic side of these subscription services in funding an indie AA type of project and how early access. To me that's very fascinating because how games get funded seems to be changing over the last 15 years. And I don't know if that's just my observation from the outside as an amateur, but it seems like the work is different in that respect.
Oh, absolutely. So, to a certain degree, making games has never been easier because digital distribution, with a few pushes of a few buttons, you are live worldwide on Steam. There's no gatekeeping anymore, which used to be the case with like physical distribution. You had to find a publisher, they go to retail and whatnot. So, very complex process. And obviously, there was not the funding for that. And you couldn't make small games because of the whole retail distribution chain. The game had to be at a certain price, otherwise it just doesn't make sense. So
Mm-hmm.
only because of digital distribution you could make games that sell for 10 or 20 bucks, like the indie scene. So otherwise it wouldn't have existed. That's one. The second is like Unity and Unreal Engine. You can use it without significant upfront cost, and they just
Mm-hmm.
get a royalty share. So that's the other big change. Now, that means now the whole world is your competition. So anybody in the
Mm-hmm.
world, any team in the world can participate. So that makes it even harder. And this is why discoverability, but also funding is so crucial. And this is why deals like Game Pass or being on the Epic Game Store, I think they still fund games. Or then there's the Apple, what's the program again?
Uh, Apple Arcade.
Thank you. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So they also have a program. So if they're a little bit more in the family style games, if you're working on a title like that, definitely go to Apple. These deals are fantastic because and oftentimes they don't require exclusivity. So Game Pass, for instance, there is no exclusivity on Game Pass on Xbox. We can launch in the same day as PlayStation. And
Mm-hmm.
And this is really, it enables teams like us and even smaller teams to work on their dream project that otherwise a publisher wouldn't have picked up. So yeah, this is why we see more games in general, but also more different games.
That's exciting to hear about. That's, and to me, just super interesting on a number of levels. I appreciate you letting me go down that road because it's just fascinating. But I will bring us back to Everspace proper. There is a good bit of customization in the builds that you create by way of the different loot that you were talking about. But you also mentioned there are 9 ships that you can work with. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have 9 ship classes. And I think we went a bit crazy here. So not
Okay.
only do we have 9 ship classes, we also have 4 tiers that each of those ship classes can come in, obviously with better stats.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can even go into the hangar at some point and then customize your ship. So change the colors, put some decals on and whatnot, and change the emissive lights and the color of the thrusters and whatnot. But you can even go so far that if you found the blueprint in the game, you can change the wing type, the engines, the cockpit, even the hull. So you can completely go ham. Like we have a full transmogging system in there. So as long as you stay within your class, obviously,
Uh-huh.
but still within the class, you have different types that really changes the design, the look and feel of the ship. And yeah, people love that a lot. We see that
Yeah.
it has been a lot of work. I think we counted we have more than 200 ship modules that you can combine with each other. It's crazy.
This is a Starfighter fan's dream, then, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. We see this in the streams. Even streamers like to have their own ship and change that. There's even Coke Carnage. His logo is also in the game, so
Mm-hmm.
obviously he loves that to put that onto the wings and whatnot. And yeah, and then they come up with crazy color combinations. And there's gonna come more. So we're working on a free update already. So we add
Mm-hmm.
even more content to the game that's scheduled for later this year. So there will be more items, more customization, more ship modules, just more.
Is it difficult to avoid temptation to create kind of some well-known starfighters from different sci-fi genres? Is it difficult to battle that, or is it fun to just explore what you all can do with your style?
Yeah, you have to walk a fine line. Obviously, you cannot go too close to iconic spaceship designs.
Mm-hmm.
However, you can certainly get inspired by stuff, and even
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the big movie franchises, even they got inspired by other
Mm-hmm.
movies that had been there earlier. So it's a gray area. You have to make sure that it still has this your own design language. If it's
Mm-hmm.
too straight, like as an obvious copycat, that's not a good idea. But on the other
Mm-hmm.
hand, people say, well, I want to have a spaceship that looks like a certain spaceship in
Mm-hmm.
this super popular game. Of course, you have to avoid, or you just simply cannot have
Mm-hmm.
registered names. Like if there are iconic names for a certain type of space fighter, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
using it right now to not get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot have that in there, but you can have certainly you can have lookalikes.
Mm-hmm.
That is fine. And if you go the customization road, then people actually can customize their ship the way they saw a certain ship in another, let's say, in a movie or even in
Mm-hmm.
a game, and
Mm-hmm.
make something that's quite similar. Not exactly like it, but quite similar. Yeah, of course.
As a fan of Starfighter games, we've had a few in recent years, but one of the things I love most is seeing the weapons in space, the way that different lasers or missiles or whatnot look in space to me is just super cool. And you guys have a plethora. And just in watching the trailer and watching the PC reviews, you guys have a lot of weapon types. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we have easily more than 20 different types of primary weapons, and
Hmm.
they change. So if you see how to say, the pin that have a gimbal mechanic, so
Hmm.
actually the weapon shoots where you aim with the mouse or the controller. So actually you control the weapons, not so much the ship. The ship follows your weapon aiming. This makes it so accessible and play like a shooter. And on the
Hmm.
wingtips, depending where the hard points for the weapons are, you actually see that weapon. And if you
You
equip
see the
different,
gun like
yeah,
angle?
yeah, you see the gun angling, and of course it also changes. So if you have let's say there's a rail gun, there's an auto cannon, whatever, a thermal gun that has auto tracking projectiles, you see that changing. And then again, there are uncommon, common, superior, legendary. I always forget one. I think we have 5 stages,
Uh-huh.
rarities, and then you see these change, and then also the color of the projectiles are changing. So yeah, there's a lot where you can sink your teeth in. So that's just the primaries. Then we do have easily similar amount of secondary weapons like your missiles, rockets. Then some do EMP damage, shield damage, some do armor damage, whatnot. Then there are different type of mines that web your enemies, destroy, just have a great explosion. Again, have EMP mines, and then it's really a question: how do you combine these
Mm-hmm.
primary and secondary weapons with the capabilities of your ship? For example, if you fly a bomber, you have endless amount of missiles because that's its specialty.
Mm-hmm.
You never have to buy missile stocks. Usually, it's something that you burn through, and then if you are at a station, you have to restock your missiles. But with a bomber, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Versus if you, let's say, you play a scout, it's very fast and quick, you get extra damage for long range weapons. So that's your sniper class, so to speak. And obviously, you won't go for missiles. You would go for a railgun, and then maybe for a thermal gun that has this auto tracking. That you can fly around rather crazy and be very, very fast. But you know that either it's a long range hit scan, or
Mm-hmm.
you have your seeking projectiles that really melt enemies.
That's so cool. And you've got these different weapons to battle different types of enemies. In watching people play and stream the game, they're battling capital ships, they're navigating asteroids, they're battling and dogfighting other starfighters. A lot of different mission types here, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not only in open space. You also can fly down to the planet's surface, and you can even go underground. So certain
I have
planets.
not seen that.
So we have complex cave systems. We fly through the cave. So it's a bit like, you remember Descent? I think it was from the late
Yeah,
90s. Yeah,
that's a
okay.
long time ago.
Exactly,
Descent.
exactly. So there are vibes of Descent where you really fly underneath the ground, and then there are certain doors that you have to open. So there are little puzzles where you have to get to the next area, and then yeah, you fight starfighters, again, mines, whatnot. Sometimes also creatures. So there are certain cave crawlers, whatnot. We even have space jellyfish at some point, and you have to get rid of those. And yeah, all types of enemies. And again, we really wanted to make sure that it's not just your typical open space combat game where you shoot at small enemies at the end of the level, like tiny, and you barely see it, so it's just a mark on the screen. No, we wanted to make sure that you also get up and, how to say, close and personal with
Hmm.
enemies, like when you fly through hollow asteroids, into space stations, even, or inside of capital ships, and then have to do certain things. There are missions that are a little bit more complex, hack terminals and whatnot. And at some point, while you cannot get out of your ship, so it's not like you do have space legs, but there are certain missions where you cannot continue with your space fighter, but then you are remote controlling a drone. And then you go through very, very narrow passages and have to avoid laser barriers and other traps. So the game, again, changes. And we really wanted to make sure that there's the good change of gameplay,
Hmm.
because it takes about 50 hours roughly to complete the game. So if you beeline the story, probably 30. If
Hmm.
you go for a completionist run, then it's closer to 100. But we wanted to make sure that there's a good diversity in gameplay, and that really helps a lot.
Uh, Forgive my ignorance on this one. Does the player get to have multiple ships that they can rotate between? Because we have so many classes and builds, or are they operating with one ship throughout?
You can change your ship at any time, and you can keep them at your hangar. So there's a home base that you have to level up, and then this
Hmm.
is where you store your goods, your ships. I think you can store 9 ships, I think it is.
Hmm.
And then your equipment gets automatically transferred. So if you say, I want to change the ship, then you don't have to go manually and take the weapons over. So that's done for you. And then there are ship dealers scattered around the game world. Every star system has, I think, at least one ship dealer. And
Hmm.
then if you approach them, you have to see what's in stock, and that
Hmm.
changes. So might make sense, you go back and see if they have a better offering, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can also decide if you swap your ship and just have to pay the difference in price. Yeah, or if you're wealthy enough, you just start a nice collection.
And how does one get wealthy? I think in some of the missions there are, I believe you can mine or trade. Is that correct?
Yeah, every space game has to have mining and
I thought so.
trading, of course. You can buy low and sell high in the system. There's even it's a simple but very effective way that tells you if this is a good price to buy, and if in another system there's a good price to sell. It's not fully dynamic like you see a big freighter. I don't know, dumping coffee or clothes
Mm-hmm.
or earth wine or weapons, and then the price changes on that station. It doesn't go that crazy because we still wanted to keep it lightweight and easy and fun to play with. So you find
Mm-hmm.
your trading routes, and you quickly find out the further you go, the better is the trading in the trading case, right? The better the margin, so to speak. So this is one. Then obviously completing jobs. So we have job boards.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much every star system has a variety of jobs that you can do. Those are repeatable mini missions, so to speak, like fighting certain baddies, recruiting lost containers. So you have search. It's more like a search mission. Then there's always a fun one, Minesweeper. So you go to an area where a lot of mines. So you
Mm-hmm.
either have to shoot them down, and certain weapons, like a flak cannon that does a lot of splash damage, is much better suited than as if you have a railgun, which is more a sniper that takes a
Mm-hmm.
long time. The best thing is, though, use one of the devices. So there's a certain device that turns into an auto missile turret, and there's an
Mm-hmm.
option, if you upgrade it, it kills all the mines in your vicinity. So if you find out that, you would rather go for a job, the mine sweeping job, and have that equipped. So
So
that's another way. And then of course you loot a lot. So enemies drop loot that you can sell, but also there are a lot of containers. Some are bulletproof, some are secured, so you have to solve a little puzzle to unlock those. And then there's special gear in there that is also hand placed, so the higher rarities are in those secured containers. So there's a good reward for solving the little puzzle, and
mm-hmm.
then you can sell these for good money because they are they're high in price.
That is a lot to take in. Was it difficult to avoid the player being overwhelmed? Like, let's say I just want to play a shooter. Other people want to get really into the buy low, sell high type mentality. It feels like the game is suited for both to be successful.
Yeah, that's the thing with space games and space game fans. They would just want everything. We
Yeah.
even have space game fans say, "Oh, I want to fly capital ships," which changed the game completely. I mean, you couldn't dock at stations anymore and whatnot, so we won't do that. But this
Mm-hmm.
is what people want, right? Um, but we also saw that certain things are within the hardcore space community. The puzzle mechanics are not so popular, so they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"No, I just want to fly and shoot stuff," right?
Mm-hmm.
And which is why we made all these puzzle mechanics optional, so you really don't have to do them. There are a
Mm-hmm.
few exceptions in the main mission, but really kept that easy. Still, you get these complaints, why there are so many containers that I have to open. It's like, well, then don't open them. And on the other hand, then some might think that the combat is too intense. They just
Mm-hmm.
want to do exploration and say, well, why are there so many enemies? We're like, well, it's a space combat game. There should be enemies, right?
Yeah, we want
So
to shoot
you
enemies.
yeah, exactly. You always have that, but we also try to make sure that each star system has its areas.
Mm-hmm.
So you can look in every nook and cranny, and there's something to find, and then you avoid the combat. And other areas like high risk areas. So if you find a certain single decoder, then you can unlock a certain location within each star system, and there's going to be at least one boss, tons of enemies. So if you're not into exploration, you just want to blow shit up,
Mm-hmm.
then you want to farm for these signal decoders, and then
Mm-hmm.
you go for your high risk areas, and then there's action nonstop.
That's great. That's so cool. Uh, of course, it's coming to PlayStation 5, to Xbox Series S and X. It's been on PC. Uh, how does performance working with the consoles? You guys have a frame per second mark that you're hitting?
Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to make sure that really we have a very strong solid 60 frames on Xbox X and PlayStation 5. On the Xbox S, obviously that's 30.
Mm-hmm.
But on the main console, so to speak, the powerful consoles, we hit 60.
Mm-hmm.
We're rendering 4K. It's a dynamic resolution. So if there's too much going on, then while the UI it still stays in 4K, sometimes the environment might scale down a bit. But most of
Mm-hmm.
the time, we have the 4K 60 frames. And since our team has a background, it goes all the way back to making 3D mobile games, they're pretty knowledgeable about performance optimization. So we invested a lot. Unreal Engine is a great tool. Obviously, you always have to strike a balance between visual quality and frame rate.
Mm-hmm.
We try to do 30 frames with better visuals, but we tested it and we all agreed at the studio it's not worth it. Let's not do this. So this is why we don't have a quality mode there. I know people would say, yeah, but I want to try it out and decide for myself. And like, it's in there. People will complain. So we said, no, we go for 60
Right.
frames and it looks great. Obviously, if you're on PC and you have hardware that's more powerful than your console,
Mm-hmm.
obviously the game looks a lot better. That's it's like it's the way it is, right?
Sure. Yeah.
We also decided not to support the legacy consoles because then we would have had to make a different game. It really,
Mm-hmm.
especially with like flying down to the planet surfaces, which are not procedurally generated, there are handcrafted. And we're
Mm-hmm.
using these height maps, and also we're using global illumination, which is baked into the textures, and that costs takes so much memory that
Mm-hmm.
the old consoles wouldn't be able to handle that, or we would
Mm-hmm.
have to scale down the quality so much
Mm-hmm.
that people would complain, well, this game doesn't look at all like it does in your trailers. And this is why we said, well, we're not going to support the legacy consoles and rather have a true next gen experience.
Gotcha. Makes good sense. Can't say I blame you, and I'm kind of glad that we're leaving some of the legacy stuff behind. But that is a point of privilege. I get that. I'm saying that. Of course, game comes out on August. I want to say 15th, August 15th. But you have a physical edition coming later for those that are wanting a collector's edition. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, it's a nice steelbook in there. Again, production time threw us a wrench in the works.
Mm-hmm.
So we had scheduled that for the same day, but
Mm-hmm.
then I don't know what it was, but supply chain issues worldwide,
Mm-hmm.
something you have to deal with, and they couldn't make it. And the next slot, literally, it's like if you miss that slot for whatever reason, something breaks in the chain,
Mm-hmm.
then you slip to the next quarter, and this is why it's going to ship early October.
Were there thoughts of abandoning physical altogether? We see some companies, even with their AAA games, saying, "All right, we're no longer doing physical."
Yeah.
Was that a pillar for you?
Um, well, we wouldn't have been able to do this on our own, so this is why we partnered with Maximum Games, and they were very
Mm-hmm.
excited about the opportunity and said, "Well, if you want to do this, then obviously you have to negotiate a sweet deal." We did that, and they're really good. They know what they're doing, so we know it's a lot of work,
Mm-hmm.
and they have their distribution team. And if you have a special genre like we do in our case, you do have your super fans, and they
Mm-hmm.
want to have that or would love or prefer to have that retail version. They put that in the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, we won't sell millions of copies. We know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. But there's enough demand in the market, obviously, or apparently, that it's worth doing this. And well, we have to see how many copies we've been selling, but we even have demand in Japan. So if a studio, a double A studio from Germany, manages to create a game that has demand in retail in Japan, so there is something behind that. So yeah, we're quite hopeful, and we're looking. Yeah, we're very excited about this. I mean, Everspace 2 in Tokyo.
Yeah.
I could fly to Tokyo and get a copy in a shop somewhere. That's pretty awesome.
That's so cool. So cool. Michael, we have covered everything that I had prepped for us and all the listener questions. We answered every single one of them, which is an absolute blast. But I want to, before we go, open the floor. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you think the new future pilots would want to know?
Yeah, maybe what's coming. So as I said, we're already working on a free update. It's gonna
Mm-hmm.
drop later this year. and it's going to add more legendaries, more item sets, more ship modules. But we're also working on a major expansion, and that's going to ship late 2024, maybe early 2025. And that's a significant one. So that this will have more star systems,
Mm-hmm.
a new storyline, new side missions, and
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be a ton of content. So almost the entire team will be working on this for 18 months or so. We even get a government funding partially from the German government. So it's a major expansion. The budget is 4 million euro, so that's quite a lot. Very excited for this. So there will be more. Even if you're a fan of Everspace 2, if you love that, it's going to take a bit of time because we have to produce the content,
Mm-hmm.
but there will be more. There's more coming.
Oh man, that's exciting. That's so cool. I dig it. I dig it. Well, Michael Schade, Schade, did I get it
Very good.
right?
Correct. Sehr
There
gut.
we go.
Sehr gut.
Yeah, there we go. CEO and co-founder of ROCKFISH Games. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Luke, thanks again for having me. Awesome.